Thank you so much. I'm grateful to be here with you for what I think is one of the most important conversations of our times. The real truth about health. We know it doesn't come from the drugstore. It doesn't come from the healthcare industry. It comes from how we live, from what we create together, from the food we eat, from the way that we interact with the world around us. And I am so happy that you are willing to step outside of the status quo of a toxic food culture to ask what else is possible for me, for my loved ones, and for my planet. So as Stephen was just sharing, my grandpa founded an ice cream company. And my dad John grew up with an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool in the backyard, 31 flavors of ice cream in the freezer. He was groomed from early childhood to one day join in running that company. At the age of 6, he was sweeping the floors in the factory. As he got a little older, he was given more and more and more responsibility. It was his father's dream that his son would inherit this business. When my dad was in his late teens, his uncle Bert Baskin became very ill, had multiple heart attacks, ended up dying of heart disease at the age of 54. My grandpa could see that coming. He wanted his son to become his partner in the business. My dad said no. And he walked away from a path that was practically paved with gold, as well as ice cream, to follow his own rocky road, as we say. And he did move to a little island off the coast of Canada, where he and my mom built a one-room log cabin, grew most of their own food, practiced yoga and meditation for several hours a day, and named their kid Ocean. They almost named me Kale. And this was before kale was cool. For the sake of my future social life, I'm glad they took the conservative route when they named their son. But we did eat a lot of kale, along with cabbage and carrots and onions and broccoli and all sorts of other vegetables from the garden. And we ate a very healthy diet, and we lived a healthy life, and it showed up. At the age of 10, I ran my first marathon. I was setting records, elementary school records, granted, for push-ups and pull-ups, and we were all very physically fit. And then my dad began working on a book called Diet for a New America. He was researching the American food system that he had grown up in, and he wanted to share with the world the power of food to be a stand for health, for our bodies and health for our planet. He published Diet for a New America in 1987. It inspired millions of people to look at their food choices as a chance to make a difference on the planet. The media had a lot of fun with the story. They called him the rebel without a cone. We received over 20,000 letters from people. Handwritten letters, back before email, from people thanking him for changing their lives. One of his readers, as fate would have it, ended up being my grandpa. So my grandpa, Irvin Robbins, had lost his brother-in-law and business partner, Bert Baskin, to heart disease at the age of 54. My grandpa was not exactly on the leading edge of health consciousness, and so he was of the belief that there was no connection between food and health. When my dad had asked him if he thought there might be any connection between the amount of ice cream that his Uncle Bert would eat and his fatal heart attack, my grandpa said no. His ticker just got tired and stopped working, and we will never discuss this again. But now my grandpa was 71, and he was facing serious type 2 diabetes, weight issues, and heart problems himself. And his doctors told him he didn't have long to live unless he made some big changes. And then his cardiologist gave him a copy of a certain book by the name of Diet for a New America and suggested he read it, which my grandpa did. Not the signed copy my dad had sent him, but the copy the cardiologist gave him, because now it had been blessed by the high priest of Western medicine. He didn't just read it, though. He followed its advice. He started eating a lot less animal products. He gave up sugar. He even gave up ice cream. And he started eating a lot more whole plant foods. And he got results. Predictable results that we see time and again when people make these kinds of changes. He got off all of his diabetes and blood pressure medications, which he no longer needed. He lost a lot of weight that he badly needed to lose. His golf game improved 7 strokes. He was a happy camper, and he added another couple decades of health to his life. When the time finally did come, he was on his deathbed in his 90s, and my dad and I were with him. And he said to my dad, he said, "When you left Baskin-Robbins, I thought you were crazy." And I might have been right. He said, "But thank God some of us have lived long enough to learn a few new things." And he said, and he looked at both of us and he said, "I want you to know that I'm proud of you because you're making a difference and you're helping people be happier and healthier, and that's a good thing." Do you have any idea how much courage it takes for a man with that kind of business success, who has that much investment in believing that ice cream makes people happy, make those kinds of changes? I mean, he was one stubborn cookie. And he could have taken that stubborn cookiness right to the grave. And most men in his position would have. But my grandpa made the choice to listen to his doctors, and he wanted to live more than he wanted to be right. And so he made changes, and he got results. And to me, he is a hero. Yes, I'm proud of his business accomplishments because he was very good at what he did. But he was also a hero because he had the courage to change and to learn and to listen to the renegade son who turned his back on his life's work because he was more interested in life than he was in always being right. And to me, that's something we can all learn from, because I don't know if you've ever found it hard to change an old habit or met people who are kind of entrenched in their ways. But if my grandpa could make these changes, then there just might be hope for the rest of us as well. Now, we have seen in our family what happens when we eat the standard American diet. We get the standard American diseases and we die the standard American death. But we've also seen in our family what happens when we make a change. And we've seen that that change is available to everyone, no matter what age or stage of life you are at. In fact, some people say, "Is there hope for me? I've eaten not too well for a lot of years." And I say, you know what? The worse off you are in some ways, the more you have to gain from making a change. Because the gap between where things are and what they could be is room to grow, to heal, to regenerate, and to thrive. And I am not interested, just for the record, in just adding years of misery and suffering and decrepitude to life. We've all known elders who were miserable and frankly didn't really want to be here all that much anymore. But I am interested in how we add life to years so that we can thrive, so that we can love who we are. And, Dan Buettner studied the blue zones, the places in the world where people have lived the longest and healthiest lives. And he reported on this for National Geographic. And he identified 6 of them in Greece and in Italy and in Loma Linda, California, and Costa Rica and Okinawa, Japan. And he looked at all these places and he said, what do they have in common? What's unique about them? Now, one thing these places had in common is people don't just live long, they live well. So it's typical that people in their 80s, 90s, even past 100 are active. They're vibrant, they're doing stuff. They have sex lives, they have joy and passion and pleasure and vitality. They're exercising, they're engaged with the world. They're not just locked up and warehoused in a senior center, kind of sort of coping. And I think that is an inspiration to us, because that's what I want. I want that wisdom grows with maturing, and maturing comes with aging, and aging is actually becoming an elder, not just an older. My dad's an example of that. He's 71. We work out at the gym together. He's buff. And in fact, I hate to say this, I'm no weakling, but he's stronger than me on most everything. That's 71. And we've been, for about 15 years, we've been wondering when the day would come when I would catch up with him. And I keep thinking we're almost there, and I'm getting stronger for the last 15 years. But so is he, at 71 years old. It's crazy. So this stuff works. It really does. And I want to show you how you can put it into action in your life and what I've learned, and I want to share some of the stories. Because, I've been talking about food and living and breathing the food revolution for my entire life. And I'd love to share with you a bit about what that's meant for me and how it's showing up. So, but first, let me ask something about you. How many of you how many of you feel that we live in a toxic food culture? Okay. How many of you believe that food is the foundation of health? Or a foundation? Yeah? Okay. All right. How many of you believe that we need a fundamental change in the way we produce food and the way we consume food? Okay. How many of you are concerned about the deterioration of the biosphere and the stability of our climate for future generations? How many of you are bothered by the way that animals are treated in modern factory farms? How many of you are concerned about the health of our kids and the next generation? How many of you think you know why I'm asking all these questions? Because it's all connected. Because every bite we take is a vote for the health we want and for the world we want. And ultimately, when we make that a conscious vote and an intentional vote, we get to be a part of the solution. We get to be a part of the reclamation and the healing and the transformation. We get to reclaim our humanity. We get to feel our integrity with all of life. We get to know that we are a part of an ecosystem and we are a contribution to that ecosystem. Because food is not just a commodity. It's also a community. It's a web of relationships. And when we choose to make our food choices when we bring them into alignment with our integrity and our values, then we don't just change our health, we actually shift the course of history on this planet. That's how powerful food is. Thank you. So I was inspired by my dad's example and my grandpa's example, honestly, of making big impact on the world. And when I was 16 years old, I founded a nonprofit organization. It was called YES, Youth for Environmental Sanity. And we organized a national tour. We spoke to school assemblies across the United States about the environment and how young people could make a difference in the world. One of the things we encountered as we traveled across the country was stereotypes. In every school, people were putting people in categories and boxes based on the clothes they were listening to or the clothes they were wearing or the music they were listening to based on what they looked like on the outside without really knowing always what was on the inside. So we made a list of the stereotypes we were hearing. It went from A to Z. It was airhead, bimbo, cheerleader, druggie, environmentalist, flirt, gay, hippie, idiot, jock, kid, loser, mod, nerd, outcast, punk, queer, raver, skinhead, tease, ugly, virgin, weirdo, X generation, yuppie, and zero. And any of you ever heard any of those before? Yeah. So, and they're all very dehumanizing, right? In a way, when you judge somebody without honoring the fullness of who they are, because nobody can fit into a label. But we realized that we were traveling around, and people were hearing that environmentalists were coming to school, and they were getting some crazy ideas of what we were going to be like. So we realized some people thought we were going to talk about the environment, and we were going to be like this. Hi, everybody. According to scientists of the modern era, O3 in the upper stratosphere is interacting with oxides of nitrogen in a manner slightly different than was originally perceived in the mid-1980s. And then there were the people who heard we cared about the planet, and they thought we'd be like this. Every time I see a tree being cut down, it's like a dagger was being thrust right through my heart. Save the trees. And then there were the people who heard we were from California. They thought we'd be like this. Hi, all you beautiful people. We just have to open our hearts and love each other. Peace, brothers and sisters. The truth is, we weren't any one of those things. We were all of those things. And a lot more. We were young people who cared. We cared enough to speak out, to take action, to make a difference with our lives. And as we traveled across the United States and reached more than 650,000 students in school assemblies, we realized we were not alone. We saw that in every community there were people who cared, and that the environment meant different things to different people. To some people, the environment was trees and blue sky and saving the climate or stopping rainforest destruction. To other people, the environment was gangs and concrete, trying to get home from school without getting shot. We realized that to be an environmentalist meant to care about people as well as the planet, because it's all connected, and there is no solution for the globe that doesn't also work for humanity. So as we traveled the country, we were learning more from the students we were talking to, I think, even than they were learning from us. And eventually, we ended up working on a global level. We started organizing leadership trainings for young people who wanted to change the world for the better, all over the planet. And I worked with leaders in over 65 countries over the next 20 years, directing this nonprofit. And I worked with people in so many different places and ecosystems. And I dined with Bedouins in the Middle Eastern deserts. And I dined with indigenous peoples in the tropical rainforest. And I dined with African women who were working for social justice in West Africa. And I dined on kale and collard greens and black-eyed peas in the southern United States with African-American social justice activists. And as I traveled the globe, I was realizing that everybody eats. And what we eat has an immense impact. And that's when I got that there is a massive change happening around the world. That the American way of producing food with agrochemicals, GMOs, pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, fertilizers was spreading. That the American way of processing and marketing food with KFC and McDonald's and Baskin-Robbins was spreading. And that as our way of eating was being exported and spreading around the world with mass production and with hyper-processing, with the addition of more and more added sugar and industrialized animal products and factory farms, waistlines were expanding. Hospitals were filling up. People were getting sick with diseases that had been unheard of in their countries just a couple generations ago. I'm talking things like Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes. We think it's normal. It's all around us. But you know what? A lot of these diseases were rare just a few generations back in many parts of the world. And they could become rare again. So as I traveled the globe and worked with leaders and I saw how much my country was spreading something, I realized I had a responsibility. And so in 2012, I moved on from the nonprofit and I joined forces with my dad directly in launching Food Revolution Network to focus on food. Healthy, ethical, sustainable food for all. So we launched an online summit, interviewed some of the top food experts on the planet, shared their interviews for free in the Food Revolution Summit. And as we interviewed them, my dad knew a lot of these folks from his work, my jaw was dropping because I was hearing more and more studies, research, data that all pointed in the same direction. You know, there is a myth today that we are confused about food and that we should be confused about food because it's confusing. Now, I'm not going to argue that we're confused. 95% of the American public wants to make healthy choices at least some of the time. Only 25% of the American public feels clear about what those healthy choices are. And a lot of those people are probably wrong. But there have been over 10,000 studies published in peer-reviewed medical journals looking at the long-term impact of food on health. Serious researchers who look at the data are not fundamentally confused about the long-term health and well-being of human beings. We have an overwhelming body of data that tells us in no uncertain terms that there is a direction we need to move in, and that if we make those changes, we can save the lives of millions and millions of people. The Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, based out of the University of Washington, conducted the largest study in world history on the causes of death and disease they published their report called The Global Burden of Disease. They had hundreds of people working on this. They analyzed hundreds of lifestyle factors, and they looked at about 100 causes of death. And they ended up concluding that the modern industrialized diet is the leading factor behind 678,000 deaths in the United States alone every year. This means that our diet is causing more death than all of the Americans who died in World Wars I, II, Korean War, Vietnam War, both Iraq wars, Afghanistan war combined in 1 year. But this time the enemy isn't another country or bullets. It's our own knives and forks and what we're doing with them. We're literally digging our own graves with our knives and forks. But here's the good news. That means we can change it. That means we can do something different. So what do serious researchers agree on? We need to eat less sugar and processed junk. We need to eat less chemicals with names we don't know how to pronounce. We need to eat less animal products, particularly from factory farms. And we need to eat more whole plant foods, particularly vegetables. Those simple changes can generate enormous results for very large numbers of people. Now, there are details. We're still learning all the time about the microbiome and digestion, about the brain and how it works, about the role of genetics and how to turn on the good genes and turn off the bad ones. It's called epigenetics. We are learning more and more all the time about how we can optimize and finesse diet and lifestyle for abundant health. Is it best to do intermittent fasting? Is it best to fast in longer periods? Is it best to be more raw or cooked? Is it best to, include legumes or not? What's the right balance of the macronutrients, fat, carbohydrates, proteins? But here's what we know. A diet based around whole plant foods is optimal for human health in almost every case. And that can make a world of difference. And this sea of confusion is largely manufactured. My friend Dr. David Katz worked for Good Morning America as a medical correspondent for some years. He was forbidden from ever covering the same story or the same piece of advice twice. So if he did a story on how a whole foods plant-based diet was good for health, that was it. He could never say that again. But if some new fangled theory comes down the pike that tomatoes are killing you, then he could say that, and they would get eyeballs, and he would get advertisers, and his producers would be happy. So our media industry has an investment in giving us the news, even if it's wrong. So I'm interested in us learning from history, learning from all of the studies that have been done. What we need today is not fundamentally more studies. What we need is not to know more, it's to do more with what we know. Because, let's face it, people aren't that confused. Everyone knows that we need to eat less sugar. Everyone knows we need to eat more vegetables. But we have a diabetes epidemic that is still rising. Obesity and overweight is now 70% of the population in America. 19% of our gross domestic product goes to disease symptom management. We call it healthcare. You know and I know it is not caring for health. It is managing the symptoms of disease. 19%, and that is expected to rise dramatically. The amount of money we're spending on treating Alzheimer's is expected to double in the next generation. Children born today are the first generation in this country's history to have a lower life expectancy than their parents. So we know more than ever, but we're sicker than ever. It's time to put it into action. It's time to make the revolution happen. And that's why we're here. So, as I was just preparing today before I started, somebody came up to me and she was sharing with me her grief at the state of things in the world. She said, do you ever feel like we're losing? Do you ever feel like it's hopeless? And I wonder if you ever feel that way. If you ever feel like we want to have a brave face, we want to have courage, and we want to believe that something beautiful is possible. We want to have hope. But when you actually look at the facts and you see how many people are sick and suffering and the possibility of medical-induced bankruptcy for this nation and all the wars and all the guns and all the bombs and all the violence and all the climate destabilization and all the topsoil erosion and all the aquifers getting depleted and all the people who may not be able to grow food in future generations, do you ever feel despair? Do you ever feel cynical? Do you ever feel worried about the future our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids will inherit? And I think that you can't take an honest look at the data and not feel some concern about a lot of things in the world right now. I know I do. Here's what I want to say about that. I don't think we do the right thing because it's everything. I think we do the right thing because it's something. Because it's what is ours to do. Helen Keller said, I'm only one person and I can't do everything, but just because I can't do everything does not mean I will refuse to do that which I can. And we are part of a globe. We are part of a species. And sometimes it's easy to feel not like a drop in the bucket, but more like a drop in the sea. And yet, we are so critically important. Because all that's needed for the forces of evil to win is for forces of good to do nothing. And all that's needed to turn things around is enough people saying enough is enough, and we literally shift the course of culture. And right here and right now, we are shifting the course of culture. In the food world, for example. Did you know that in the last generation, we have quintupled the number of farmers' markets in the United States? Did you know that in the last 4 years, the number of Americans who identify as vegan has increased sixfold, from 1 million to 6 million in the United States, and rising? Did you know that the number of Germans who are on a low or no meat diet in those same years has increased from 22% to 42%? Did you know that 9 states have banned gestational crates for pigs? That they have been banned throughout the entire European Union? That states are banning cages for chickens? Now, you may hear that, and some of you may be informed enough to know that just because chickens are cage-free doesn't mean they're happy or healthy. But the point here is that the arc of history, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, is long, but it may bend towards justice. The point here is that when we hear about the truth, we're outraged. 94% of Americans say that animals raised for food, if animals will be raised for food, should be treated humanely, free from cruelty. Nobody would look at our modern factory farms and say that that is free from cruelty or humane. That's why we have ag-gag laws in some states where it is forbidden for people to take pictures of industrialized animal agriculture systems. The ag-gag law in the state of Iowa was just struck down at the federal level. It's found unconstitutional. You see, we deserve the truth. And we want the truth. And when we are informed with the truth, more often than not, we become wiser. More often than not, our choices become better. And the great thing about food is it is one place where we have immense power. Because we can choose with every bite we take to stand for the health we want and for the world we want, and we know that it makes a difference. It's not just theory. They say you can make a difference. You do make a difference. And the wonderful thing about food is the difference you make doesn't just impact your personal health, but it also impacts our global health, and it's all connected. I think that's pretty awesome. I was just talking to a colleague of mine, Craig Watts, North Carolina. Craig was a chicken farmer. Craig inherited some land from his family, And he decided to make some money raising chickens for Purdue. He had about 80,000 birds, I believe, on his property in these giant warehouses. And he was miserable. But he was doing what Purdue said to do. He did everything by the books. He fed them the feed he was supposed to give them. He was forbidden from opening any windows or giving them any natural light because that would stimulate more activity, which would reduce the feed conversion ratio. So he had to keep them completely enclosed. We're talking 20,000 birds in a single warehouse. They get about 1 square foot per bird. So as they get bigger, they cannot lift a single wing. They are bred to be morbidly obese, so they cannot walk. This is kind of the equivalent to a human infant by the age of 3 months weighing about 600 pounds. That's how fast they grow now. So they can't walk, and they sit in manure. The barn is cleaned every few years. So they're sitting in the manure not only of themselves, but the past multiple generations of chickens before them. The floor is concrete, but it's actually manure. They can't walk, and they're lying in manure, and their feathers fall off because they are so sick from lying there in the manure all day long. Can you imagine the stench of this place? The birds, they're driven completely insane. And then one day, Craig's feeling pretty bad about what he's doing, but he's just trying to stay afloat and get out from under a mountain of debt from building this whole operation in the first place. When he sees an ad on television, it's Jim Purdue. Jim Purdue is saying, "We take good care of our birds, and they are happy and healthy because we love our birds. Because happy birds make healthy meat." And he sees this ad. He's like, "I'm no psychologist, but I know these birds aren't happy. I'm no vet, but I know these birds aren't healthy. And I know that this man is lying. And it's bad enough to be treating birds like this, but I'm no liar. And if I don't say something, then I'm part of the lie." So he invited Compassion in World Farming, a nonprofit organization, to come on in with cameras. Now, this was no undercover operation. This was in the light of day. He said, "Come on in. Take a look at where these birds are living." He was an award-winning producer. He'd won multiple awards with Purdue, year after year, including weeks earlier. They said he was one of their top producers. So, and they had inspections every week, so they knew what was going on. He was doing it all right. He showed birds lying in their own feces, unable to walk. He showed dead birds lying on the floor. 5% of the birds died while they were there. So the live birds are literally surrounded, not only by feces, but by dead birds. And this video went viral. The chicken farmer who spoke out. People all over the world saw it. Purdue was not happy. They said he was a bad apple, that he was doing it all wrong. He was like, "Well, here's my certificates of inspection. Here's all my awards that I've been winning. You all didn't say that last week." So they tried to say that, but he pointed out that he was following their advice. In fact, their requirements, that he was forbidden from opening windows. So they tried to make it go away. They sent him to a rehabilitation program for farmers who need to learn how to do it right. He was like, "It's a joke. I've seen these videos 1,000 times." He ended up getting out of the chicken farming business. He grows crops on his property now instead. And he went into becoming a consultant to help factory farmers transition. And that's what he does now. Now, Craig is a salt-of-the-earth guy. This isn't an Ivy League kind of fellow. This is a salt-of-the-earth guy who was a chicken farmer for decades. And that's what he knew. But he knows right from wrong. And he has a heck of a lot more integrity than a lot of people, almost anyone I've ever met. So Craig is an inspiration to me. He's a hero to me, just like my grandpa is a hero to me. Because every one of us has the capacity, no matter how deep we are in a system, to shift and to make a change and to inspire others to do the same. You know, in martial arts, I took martial arts when I was a teenager, and in martial arts, there's this concept of being centered. When you're centered, you can be pushed and you'll be stable, and the push goes into the earth. But when you're not centered, then a little tap and you fall right over. I think that integrity is a little bit like that. That when we are congruent, when there is congruency between our words and our values and our actions, then we have a potency, we have a center, we have a dynamism that makes us a force to be reckoned with. Whereas when we are following the whims of the status quo, when we are eating and living in certain ways simply because it's what we inherited or what's done all around us or it's normalized, without thinking, without choosing, then we become unconscious and complicitous. Just want to comment, it's feeling very warm in here. I know it's like subarctic outside, but I'm wondering, I'm seeing people fanning themselves. Is there a way that we could bring the temperature down in here a bit? Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, yeah. Yeah. So, let me see, that's a good transition to think about what other stories I want to tell you. Okay, so how do we create change? Well, it's a question I've been asking my whole life. And I started off talking about food and health with my mom and dad real early. My dad grew up in the heart of the American food industry, and at the age of 5, he's taken me through supermarkets, and we're reading ingredient labels, and he's telling me what the heck these chemicals are and what they do in the body. So I knew about blood sugar spikes by the time I was in first grade, and my friends in school are learning about that C comes after B, and I'm like, you know, thinking about kind of other stuff. But that wasn't always good for my social life. See, I was also a passionate vegetarian. I believed that animals were my friends, and I didn't want to eat my friends. I believed that my body was never meant to be a graveyard. I believed that it was morally wrong to kill animals for food, and I intended to tell the world about it. So, when I was in second grade, I became particularly passionate. I decided the time had come to speak up in the schoolyard, and I would go around at lunchtime, and my friends with their Star Wars and Cabbage Patch doll lunch boxes, you know, I would open them up, kind of like the food police, I guess, and I would give them a piece of my mind. And I thought I was, you know, doing right for the planet and the animals and all, but I don't know that I was doing right for my social life. So one day, I got in a fist fight with my friend Jeremy. And, you know, he had a roast beef sandwich, and I had told him the meat was murderer and that he was a murderer. He didn't like that. Before long, his roast beef sandwich was in the garbage, and I was in the principal's office. And I got to thinking about how we influence people and how we fail to influence people. And I did notice a certain irony that I was advocating compassion while I was getting in a fist fight with my friend. So, you know, I shared this with my dad, and he was like, "Oh my God, what the heck have we raised here?" You know, and in time, I went on a journey, and I began to explore. A new question emerged in me, which is, how do we actually create positive impact? And how do we build a truly more compassionate world? And I came to hear the words of Martin Luther King, who said to us, "You have no moral authority with those who can feel your underlying contempt." When we judge people, when we pathologize people, we lose moral standing in that relationship. And so over the years, I deepened in that journey. And then I had kids. Or kids had us, I don't know which, but twins. And our twins were born 9 weeks prematurely. It's not that uncommon with twins, but ours were 9 weeks early, and they were 6 weeks in intensive care. We didn't know if they would live or die. It was, you know, to this day, the most painful, heart-rending experience of my life, to hold my little baby while he turned blue. And, you know, there's beeping machines all around. And I knew enough to know that the chemicals in that hospital were not all benign. And yet, what could we do? We were dependent on it for our kids to survive. And so we got them home, and they were pretty traumatized, and in time it surfaced that they were on the autism spectrum, twins. And, you know, raising kids is hard enough. Raising twins is even harder. Raising autistic twins is kind of, you know, orders of magnitude more challenging. And in their first 10 years, I never had real eye contact with either of my children. We just didn't do that. I had hoped that someday I would have this experience, like melting into my children's eyes and just bonding in infinite love together, but that wasn't to be for them and I. And then we discovered a program called Sunrise, S-O-N-R-I-S-E, which focuses on relationship building. So instead of trying to train autistic people to behave differently, you build connection with them. The idea is that they show you the door into their world, and then we can show them the door out into our world. And it's all about building relationship. And the notion is that autistic people are overwhelmed. They're actually highly intelligent, and they're overwhelmed with massive stimulation, and their brains don't know how to filter. So literally, and to this day, our children can hear, there's 4 conversations in the room. I'm talking to River, and he's also hearing all the others, and they're equally loud. So your brain is naturally listening to me and not listening to the fan, or not hearing other sounds as much because you're focused on one thing. But for them, they take it all in, and they get overwhelmed really quickly. So autistic people will often focus on the same repetitive behaviors over and over again to try to feel safe in an overwhelming world, to try to feel some comfort and some familiarity, because the world can be so distressing and agitating for them. So one day, River was doing that. He's chewing on a Barbie's foot. We're having time together, and he's just sitting there, just chewing on a Barbie foot, which was one of the things he loved to do at that time. And instead of worrying that there's probably plastic made in China in that Barbie foot, and wondering what chemicals are leaching into his body, or wondering how my kid's ever going to have a dating life if he chews on Barbie feet all day long, and trying to yank it out of his mouth and getting in a fight with him, I pick up another Barbie across the room, and I start chewing on her foot. At which point, for the first time in his life, River looks at me, right in the eyes. And I could almost hear him thinking, his huge grin comes over his face, and I could almost hear him thinking, oh my God, there is intelligent life on this planet. So now we're like beaming in each other's eyes, and my heart's just melting, you know? It felt like an eternity. Then he gestures like this. Turns out his Barbie has 2 feet. River is inviting me to chew on the other foot of his Barbie. So now I come over, and we're like 3 inches apart, just beaming in each other's eyes, chewing on Barbie feet. And it was one of the happiest moments of my life, because it was a moment of first contact with my son. And I never would have got there if I worried about the plastic, the social life, the Barbies, if I thought it was my job to train my kid to behave differently. I got there because I joined him in his world. I found connection, and I brought my heart there to meet him there. And then he came back and met me. We had connection, and out of that connection, we built a new kind of relationship. And now to this day, we have eye contact regularly. Without Barbie feet, because he's kind of over that. He still has his challenges, his neurological diversity, and his ineffable joy. He has a childlike innocence at 18 that is absolutely extraordinary. When he smiles, the world shines. He's got such a big smile, and his sense of humor is just off the charts. And he has challenges that he has to work with, and we work with them together, because we're on the same team most of the time. I'll tell even another story that goes even deeper with this, and then I'm going to wrap it back, and I'm going to tell you how this relates to food. Okay. So around that same time, when he was like 10 years old, River had a lot of potty issues. It's very common with autism. And he had a sensory need to interact with his fecal material and to share that joy with his family. And his family didn't appreciate it very much. And he took it as a personal challenge to rub off our rough edges by teasing us with poop all over his hands. And so one day, I walk into the living room, and River has smeared brown mess all over the window. And it's rather smelly. And my initial instinct, which I had done dozens of times before in such a situation, was to grab him by the hand, or the wrist rather, not the hand, and drag him rather forcibly and rather roughly, because I wanted to let him know this was not okay, into the bathroom, and force his hand washing, usually holding with one hand, washing with the other, rather aggressively. Shout at him, let him know this wasn't cool, go back out, wash the window, feel so sorry for myself that I have to do this, then I've got so many better things to do with my day, and then complain about it for the rest of the day. But this day I decided to try something different. And I realized he's playing. And he's testing me. And I decided to do something different. So I drew a heart in the poop on the window. Guess what River does? He looks at me with that same smile he had when I chewed on the Barbie foot. Huge smile. He looks at me right in the eyes and he says, I'll go get cleaned up now. And he runs off to the bathroom and washes his hands. He has not smeared poop on windows since that day. Yeah. So I think River was trying to teach me something that I needed to learn. He was trying to teach me about unconditional love. He was trying to teach me about meeting people where they are and joining them in the beauty that is present. Because as disgusting as that habit was, it was also him expressing his creative spirit and his playfulness. And when I met him there, he was able to find perhaps more sanitary ways to express his spirit and playfulness. But I had to get the lesson first. So you could say River was my guru that day, and with the Barbies. And here's how it connects to food. Here I am advocating for a healthier way of eating, and indicting the status quo, and spreading the word all over the world that what we eat matters, and that what we are doing is killing us, and that we can do better. Here I am trying to make change from one set of behaviors to a very different set of behaviors. How effective will I be if my tone is the equivalent of dragging somebody by the wrist, roughly and aggressively and forcibly washing their hands? Throwing my friend's beef sandwich in the garbage? Not very effective. But if we can learn to align with the good and the dignity and the longing for health and the purpose and the spirit and the joy in other human beings, then we gain traction in that relationship. Then we become a partner to what they want for their lives. Then we become an ally to their purpose. Because nobody likes to have dogma shoved down their throats. Nobody likes to be in a power struggle and to lose. Nobody likes, I told you so. But at the end of the day, we can create more change when we work with people's natural desire to survive. And we won't reach everybody. I think we figured that out, right? There are some people that are set in their way. Sometimes pain pushes, sometimes vision pulls. Some people are not willing to change unless they are in a certain degree of pain, and sometimes they won't even change then. But you know what? You can lead a horse to water, you can't make it drink, right? Similarly with humans, we can share the truth, we can share the love, and at the end of the day, we can share who we are. And that embodiment, that expression of our purpose and our joy and our vitality is the most powerful form of leadership there is. Now let's suppose you want to go further. Let's suppose you want some strategies for how to actually influence people. How many of you have people that don't eat quite the way you'd like them to? Or don't live quite the way you'd like them to? Let's suppose you want to influence those people in a good way. So what are some of the top tips? Okay, one thing, if you want to give somebody a resource, like a DVD or a book, try sticking a Post-it note on there that says, I thought of you on page 314. I thought of you at 1731. There's a great spot on this DVD. Your odds of them opening that book or watching that DVD just quintupled. And I bet you they go straight to that page. But if it's a good page, they'll keep going because they want to know what made you think of them, right? It's personal then. It's connected to them. Another tip, share healthy food. The best doorway to someone's mind is often their stomach. So give the gift of healthy food. Now, some people may not like it because some of the stuff that we healthy eaters eat isn't always popular with folks whose taste buds have been overwhelmed with an overdose of sugar and chemicals and processed stuff. It can take some time to learn to love foods that love us back. But you get to be a part of that solution when you share healthy foods at parties, at potlucks. I have a friend who was, he and his girlfriend were going to a potluck party, and they wanted to bring something, but they were out of time. They hadn't prepared. So they stopped at Whole Foods. And she wanted to bring a vegan cake. She thought that everyone would like that. And he was like, no, cake isn't really what I want to bring. And he wanted to bring berries, and like a berry platter. And they got in a real fight about it, like for real, like shouting in the Whole Foods. And they ended up deciding to bring both, and they took a bet on which one would be consumed at the end of the party more. Well, she got there first, and she sticks the cake right in the middle where there was a big spot, right in the middle of the food table. There was just a little corner for the berries that was left, so he put them there. And he was like, he admitted to me later that as sure as he was on the outside that he was going to win, on the inside he really thought he was going to lose and the cake would win. Well, guess what? At the end of the party, half the cake remained, the berries were gone. To make matters more dramatic, someone had left a note on the berry tray that said, thank you for being so thoughtful to bring something healthy. So there is a point where we sell ourselves and our communities short, sometimes. There is a point where we think of ourselves as more hedonistic and less thoughtful and conscious than maybe we really are. And so sharing food is a wonderful step. You can also create meal share programs. If you have other people in your life that maybe also want to eat healthy, share food with each other. You can do it formal or you can do it casual. But I think that one of the real epidemics of modern times is loneliness, isolation, a feeling of separation. And a lot of people fear that healthy food will intensify that. That if they really choose to go plant-based or give up sugar or whatever else, they will lose connection with people in their lives. And what I want to say is that it can actually bring you more connection with people who are aligned with you around a shared purpose when you create that. So some people I know, like on Monday, Susan brings lunch for her peers, and on Wendy does, and they share healthy food that way. Other people make extra soup and give it to the neighbors. A lot of people cook big quantities on the weekend, and then they freeze food and have it all week long. Make little to-go containers for lunches. Have them prepped the night before so you don't have to scrounge or go out in the middle of the day. There are so many steps you can take to build connection and to create healthy habits that set you up for success. For so many people, the problem isn't knowing what to do, it's doing what they know. So I'm passionate about that, and that's why in 31-Day Food Revolution, I'm choosing to focus, every chapter ends with action steps you can take that you can apply in your life to get results. Now you may wonder why 31 days. Is it because there's some mystical, magical formula that 31 days is how long it takes to change life? Well, yeah, there's a lot of research that says it takes about a month to enshrine a new habit. But I was also having fun with it. Because in the long run, I say 31 steps to health will bring you more satisfaction and more pleasure even than 31 flavors of ice cream. Now, there are 4 parts to 31-Day Food Revolution, and this is sort of a framework for how I look at food. Part 1 is Detoxify, and that's where we focus on getting rid of the bad stuff that might be making us sick, including not just food, but also toxic water, toxic food storage containers, and toxic habits. And then part 2 is Nourish. That's where we say yes to the fabulous superfoods, the micronutrients that will really help us thrive. That's where we look at the study by researchers at the University of Perth in Western Australia that found that women who ate mushrooms, an average of 1/3 of an ounce of mushrooms per day, had a 64% drop in breast cancer risk. When those same women also drank green tea daily, they had an 89% drop in breast cancer risk. That's where we look at the phenomenal power of healthy foods to heal our gut. Less than 5% of the American population gets enough fiber. And the recommended amount is probably too low to begin with. What we need to feed the healthy bacteria in our gut is fiber. That's what they eat. And if you don't get enough fiber, you can't feed the good guys. and they're not going to digest your food well. Even if you eat great, what does it matter if you're not digesting it? So we want to nourish the good guys in our gut so they can do their job, so they can produce the neurotransmitters that make our brains happy, so that it can digest the nutrients we eat and how we can absorb them. So, bacteria are wonderful. We want to feed the good ones. We look at all of this, and at the super spices like turmeric and black pepper and red pepper that are so healthy for your heart, for your brain, for your whole body. We look at the study out of Rush University. I think I mentioned this, that found, no, I didn't mention this. I'll say it now. Researchers at Rush University in Chicago found that people who ate the most greens had 11 more years of healthy brain function. 11 years. I mean, my own grandma died of Alzheimer's. At the end of her life, she couldn't remember my name. And as I was with her, I was thinking, what I would give, what everyone would give who has an elder in this situation, to give them 11 more years of brain function, have their mind back. We do anything. And we just need to eat greens, apparently, right? Blueberries added 2 more years of healthy brain function to life. Just people who ate blueberries regularly. Wild blueberries were the very best of all. I'll eat greens and blueberries and mushrooms. And I drink green tea, by the way, too. This stuff matters. It's powerful. It makes a difference. It changes lives. What happens when you put all these things together? What happens if you do all of these things and you don't eat a lot of sugar and processed junk and you eat little or no animal products? What happens when you do all this and you go organic? When you optimize your legumes, when you eat sprouted foods, when you really go maximally, what's possible? Have we even scratched the surface of what's possible for human health and vitality? I don't think we have, but I intend to find out. And part 3 is gather. That's where we focus on nourishing the web of relationships, all the humans, all the social interactions in our lives, so we can build a thriving, healthy community. And then part 4, which is what probably lights me up the most, is transform. That's where we look at how we change the world, at how we be part of the solution, not just for us, but also for our children and for our whole planet. And I want to touch on that for a moment with you now. I've worked with a lot of communities, and I have seen that statistically, the poorer you are, the darker your skin color, the more likely you are statistically to eat a diet that is based around industrialized meat products, fried foods, and highly processed foods, and sugar. And statistically, the more likely you are to suffer and to die from heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's, and all of the other chronic illnesses that are fueled by diet and lifestyle. Statistically. So, I believe that it is a crime as a society to raise children on diets where they can't think clearly, where they are morbidly obese in childhood, and they think it is their fault. I believe that if we want a society where everyone has equal opportunity, one of the first things we can do is to give everybody the foundation of health so that they can. How can anyone pull themselves up even by their bootstraps if they don't even have their health? So we need to create the conditions where everyone has opportunity, and right now we are doing the opposite. We have a farm bill in the United States. Every year, taxpayers subsidize with tens of billions of dollars commodities crops. In effect, we are lowering the price of factory farmed animal products, high fructose corn syrup, Wonder Bread. Twinkies has 14 subsidized ingredients. We think we have a free market economy. We think Whole Foods take your whole paycheck. Well, guess what, folks? There are forces at play that are fueling this, that are essentially condemning the poor to nutritional disasters by subsidizing the wrong stuff instead of the right stuff. Less than 2% of our subsidies go to fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, the foods we know we should be eating more of. Now, we could argue all day long about whether government intervention is good or bad. We could argue all day long about who should pay for health care. But bottom line is, we will continue to spend a fortune, we will continue to destroy lives, and we will continue to have an abject, sick, miserable population as long as our government is firmly on the wrong side of history. So we need to make a change. Who's in? All right. So how do we make a change? Of course, it starts with our knives and forks and what we eat. But we can do more than that. You can become an advocate. We can become spokespeople. Obviously, you can meet with representatives and political leaders and say, hey, how about if we direct taxpayer money to good stuff? What about if instead of subsidizing Wonder Bread, we subsidize healthy foods? What about Wholesome Wave? We have a food stamp program, SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program in America. Tens of millions of people depend on it to eat. Did you know that there is a program called Wholesome Wave? It's now reaching 500,000 Americans. And with it, they get double value for fruits and vegetables. Well, guess what? When people get double value for fruits and vegetables, they eat more fruits and vegetables, and they get healthier. This leads to less emergency room visits. It brings down the cost of health care. It's good for the economy. It's good for our whole society. So at this moment, it's a cooperative effort. The government allows it, but the money is coming from private fundraising. That could change. Maybe not in the current administration, but it could change. Because there's no reason why we, the people, can't create a system that actually empowers the health of the people. So that's one thing that I find inspiring. Community gardens is another. We find that when children are involved in growing food, they're more likely to eat that same food. If you want children to eat vegetables, help them grow some vegetables. School gardens, community gardens are popping up. In the city of Detroit, where 10 years ago, the median home sale price was $20,000. It's a city that's been racked by economic challenges and massive unemployment. But what started happening was that community gardens started popping up. There was a lot of vacant lots. There were a lot of unemployed people. So unemployed people started joining with vacant lots and creating gardens. Detroit is now the community gardening capital of America. There are more than 1,000 community gardens in Detroit city limits. Sometimes people respond to adversity with creative answers. Ron Finley did that in Los Angeles, South Central LA. He said it's easier to get crack cocaine than an organic banana in his community. But he decided to do something about it. He said the drive-thrus are killing more people than the drive-bys. So he started a garden on the median out in front of his house. And he said it was free. Anybody walking by can eat the food. It's a kind of creative idea. The city of Los Angeles, turns out, had an ordinance that said it was illegal to grow anything other than grass in the medians out in front of houses. So they sued him, threatened him with jail time for growing food for the community. Well, fortunately, he fought back. Ron was no slouch when it came to fighting for what was right. And he won, and he passed a new ordinance that changed the laws and said it was legal for him to do that. Short time later, as he became a national news story for his work as what he called himself the gangsta gardener, he gave a TED talk that got seen by like 6 million people telling his story. Then his landlord decided they wanted to put in a apartment complex where his house was. So they gave him eviction notice. Well, Ron spread the word. People started raising money for the Ron Finley Project to be able to buy that property, which they did, so it's now owned by his nonprofit. And now they've converted the entire backyard. It's not an apartment complex. It's a huge community garden. And he's growing all kinds of food, and anybody can come. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, there are homeless folks sneaking in there and grabbing a tomato. And he'll shout out through the window, "Hey, man, it's cool. Take your time. Enjoy." Because that's what it's for, to share healthy food with the community. And more people are jumping in to help in growing that food. So I think community gardens are one of the examples of hope. I think farmers markets, I think community-supported agriculture programs where you buy food direct from farmers are another. I think the spread of natural food stores is another. I think that more and more people care where food comes from, how it was produced, what went into it, how it affects us, and how it affects our planet. And the world is changing. Sales of organic food have quadrupled in the last generation. sales of natural food, as unpoliced as it is, as random as it is. There's a lot of things that are called natural because it's cool, because people all over the world are fed up with toxic food and hungry for a change. And we get to be a part of that, which I think is pretty awesome. So let's see, how are we on time? We're good. I want to share another story with you. I'll talk about GMOs for a moment. I know there's been some talk of that at this conference, but my take on GMOs. What's a GMO? Some people think it means God move over, but it's actually a genetically modified organism. Now, Monsanto, now Bayer, Syngenta, Dow, DuPont, they promised the world that GMOs would give us bigger yields, more drought-resistant crops, better flavor, better nutrition, and less pesticide consumption. Now, 25 years into the mass cultivation of GMOs, we haven't gotten any of that. No better yield, no more drought resistance, no better flavor or nutrition, and we've gotten more pesticides, right? What we have gotten is crops that have one or both of two traits. One is that they are pesticide producers. They produce Bt in every cell of the plant. The other is that they are herbicide tolerant. So now we're eating weed killer. A lot of people know that glyphosate, which is the primary active ingredient in Roundup, the #1 weed killer in use today, is an endocrine disruptor and it's a probable carcinogen. A lot of people do not know that it's also been patented as an antibiotic. So it kills bacteria, and when it gets into our digestive tract, what do you think it's doing? Well, it might be killing bacteria. In the 25 years since glyphosate's been spread more and more on our croplands, we've seen a massive growth in rates of food allergies. And this isn't just theory, and it's just not just paranoid moms taking their kid to the doctor because he got a scraped knee. We're talking about hospitalizations for food allergies have increased fourfold in the last generation. Why is that? Well, our food supply has become toxic in all kinds of ways. GMOs are not the whole story, but it is interesting that there's a direct correlation between the spread and the amount of glyphosate we're consuming and the growth in the number of people who are hospitalized for food allergies, right? And it's possible that there's a connection. Correlation is not causation, but when you see a correlation this strong, I think it's worth considering. So in my own work, partly based on that, partly based on not wanting Monsanto Bayer to dominate the world's food supply, partly based on concerns about safety, partly based on concerns about the 200,000 farmers in India who have taken their own lives as they went the GMO agriculture route and then wound up indebted to Monsanto, losing their farms and trying to save their families from debt by killing themselves 200,000 times. I felt that GMOs were a stand worth taking, that we should have labeling, we should have transparency. And so a number of years ago, Food Revolution Network took on that as one of our campaigns. And there were a number of ballot initiatives, some of you may remember this, in various states. One of those ballot initiatives was in the state of Washington, Initiative 527, which would mandate GMO labeling in the state of Washington. And it was very close. At first, it was everyone supported it, but then the no organizers spent boatloads of money, and they ended up raising more money and spending more money than any other ballot initiative in the history of the state of Washington. And they saturated the airwaves with a lot of ads telling people that this would add $500 per year to the price of grocery bills, which was ridiculous. It was just, we're talking about labeling. They print labels all the time. They put out a lot of fear, and it had an impact. And in the end, the initiative barely lost. But then an interesting thing surfaced. The Grocery Manufacturers Association was the organization that had been the primary funder of the No campaign on I-527 in Washington. They had put in, I think, about $30 million. And then it emerged that there is a law in the state of Washington that you have to disclose your donors. And they had not been doing so. So the state attorney general sued the GMA. And they had to disclose where their money came from. And they got a couple $1 million from Pepsi and $1 million from Coke. And it surfaced that they were raising money from the junk food industry. And around that time, I was with my son River. We were shopping in a natural food store, and I was hot and tired, and my blood sugar was low. And I see the Sadwala smoothie package. It's like, you know, mango tango or something. And I pick it up, and I'm going to drink it. I was even going to have a little bit of it in the store before I paid. And River says, Odwalla is owned by Coke. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, you want to give your money to Coke? And I looked at him like, oh my God, what have I raised here? And I was like, oh, well, no, but it's just one bottle. And, you know, I'm there. If they sell Odwalla, maybe they'll spend more money on that and less on Coke. And he's like, so you want to give your money to Coke? I'm like, no, thank you, River. And I didn't drink it. And then it hit me. Wow, Coke was trying to hide their donations in the GMO fight because they were afraid of consumer backlash. They actually broke campaign finance law in order to launder the money they put into it. And then it occurred to me, our members don't drink a lot of Coke, but we do drink Odwalla, and Honest Tea, and Dasani, and Vitamin Water, and Zico Coconut Water, all of which are owned by Coca-Cola. And so we launched a campaign calling on Coke to stop fighting and funding the fight against GMO labeling. And we got several 100,000 people signing this petition, and we got a lot of people committing to boycott all of the natural brands Coca-Cola owned. And as we did more research, we realized that Coke sales around the world were starting to go down. But sales of Honest Tea and all these other brands were going up, and that's actually where the company was making its profits. So we got some traction, and we ended up we reached out to Coke, and we said, look, folks, you say in your mission statement that you support transparency and you support consumer empowerment. But here you are on the wrong side of history, fighting transparency and fighting consumer empowerment. And we think it's time for you to change your policies. And we were giving you some incentive to change your policies. Well, interestingly enough, we managed to make contact with the board and senior leadership. And then they said, privately, we are tired of getting a PR black eye for fighting GMO labeling. And we aren't the only ones. We want a national solution, and we want to negotiate with you and the other food movement organizations, see if we can find some common ground. So I ended up facilitating meetings with leadership from Coke, Nestle, American Beverage Association, Mars, bunch of other organizations, and Center for Food Safety, Consumers Union, Food Evolution Network, of course, and Just Label It, among others. We all sat together for a series of meetings over the course of a year and a half in Washington, D.C., and we discovered that we had more in common than you might imagine. And it was fascinating for me to sit at the table with senior vice presidents from a company like Nestle, which, you know, I grew up thinking of them as evil. They were, you know, pushing infant formula in third world countries, and mother's milk they would give free samples just enough so the mother's milk would dry up, and then she can't feed her baby the milk that comes from her own body, and she's hooked on the formula, and then it's with contaminated water, and her kid's getting sick and dying, and I just found that absolutely horrendous when we all know that breast is best. But what they've changed their practices around that, but as I was sitting with all these people, I realized they don't stay up late at night trying to figure out how to kill kids. They're trying to make a buck and make a living and work in a system that pushes them in this certain direction. And a lot of these folks feel downright embarrassed about the products they're pushing. But they justify it however they do. And if they can do the right thing and make it work in the marketplace, heck, most of them will. And so we were having these conversations, and I realized it doesn't do a lot of good if everybody who's good, who tries to make a positive step, goes out of business. We've got to figure out how to make it work. And I started thinking about my grandpa, and I realized we've got to get as good at marketing health as we are at marketing ice cream. And there is so much creativity and ingenuity in the food industry that's going into how to make a killing. And we need to learn how to make a living. And so as I was sitting with these folks, I was inspired by the courage they had as I heard people saying to me, you know, what we're doing isn't working. We don't want to fight consumer right to know. We're just afraid that we're going to have to put the equivalent of a skull and crossbones on our packages, and we're going to lose market share. And who wants that, right? And we're also afraid of a patchwork quilt of different things in different states. So we talked about solutions, and I will tell you that we got to common ground. And we ended up crafting a bill that we had attorneys mutually hired from both sides that we were going to submit to Congress. And given the political climate, the industry was going to submit it to Congress. And we, the food movement, were going to act like we were slightly opposed. But in truth, we loved it. And this was going to be a national GMO labeling bill of sorts. And we had it all worked out. I can't go into the details. But I will say that we were this close. And then Congress and the White House approved a national GMO labeling bill, which is often called the DARK Act, the Deny Americans the Right to Know Act, because it essentially eviscerated the whole concept. But it purported to be about GMO labeling. And once that was passed, the industry said, okay, it's voluntary now. And then, remarkably enough, a number of these companies volunteered. Mars volunteered. They just chose to label when they have GMOs on their packages voluntarily, because they decided out of our conversations that it was the right thing to do to be honest with the consumer. So we can see the change is possible. And for me, that process showed me so much about what it takes to build real alliances. And again, back to my Sun River, align with the beauty and the integrity and the goodness that is in there somewhere. It may not be manifest through the actions we see, but I believe that we become most effective when we work with whatever spark of good is in people. And I believe there is a spark of good in just about everyone. And it's our job to find it and work with it. When I was, about 10 years ago, I was in my mid-30s, I was in Jordan. I was facilitating an international gathering of peacemakers from all over the region, and these were, I was sitting with people from Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Palestinian territories, sitting with people from warring places who literally were risking their lives to sit with each other. Like, if you're from Iran and you sit with someone from Israel, knowingly, then you risk death when you get back home. And people were willing to have the courage to sit with each other because we recognized, all of us, that the status quo in the Middle East was leading to immense suffering and violence that was harming the future of life and well-being for all the kids, and we wanted to do something better. So we sat together, and people were very honest about their struggles and their stories and their challenges, and I was honestly overwhelmed with the pain of the situation. I was with people who had lived through war zones, were living in war zones, grew up in refugee camps, had never been to their home because they'd been refugees fleeing for their lives, their entire lives, living under levels of oppression you or I could probably never imagine, levels of fear that we could probably never imagine, and it goes back through generations and generations and generations. And I also was struck not just by all the blood that's on that land going back through thousands of years, but also the sweat and the labor that it takes to survive in deserts. And I was struck by the prayers and the depth of religious passion that was in that land. And I was struck by all the tears and all the loss and all the people who have suffered, and also the tenacity of the human spirit to keep going on. On the last day of that journey, we went to a waterfall on the edge of the Dead Sea. It's at a place called Ma'in Hot Springs. It's a natural hot springs waterfall. You stand under it and the water is literally pounding you so you can barely stand. And as I stood in that waterfall, I could barely stand up, and I felt like I was being cleansed from the depths of the earth. And I found myself sobbing. And what struck me was that I did not have the solution to save the world or to save this part of the world where the problem seems so deep and so intractable. But then it struck me that I didn't have to. That in fact, all my attachment to changing things was actually keeping me from being present with things as they are. And so this prayer came to me. I found myself weeping, saying time and again, help me to release all ambition, all attachment, and all desire for all that is not so. And that was just pouring through me. And then, after a long while of just weeping with that, I found another prayer come to me. Help me to embrace totally with all that I am, all that is real. And those two sentences are part of my daily practice. Now, I don't know, whatever your orientation is to religion or faith or spirituality, that's not the point here. I shared it with people from all different faiths afterwards, and I didn't know how they would respond, but it seemed to strike a chord. But for me, there is something profound about ceasing to believe that the world is wrong for being how it is. When we truly accept this is how it is, as wrong as it is, as messed up as it is, as horrible as it is, this is what is so. And when we truly allow that to be, then we find our power as a part of it to respond. So all of the heart attacks, all of the cancers, all of the animals living in abject misery, all of the climate destabilization that is wreaking havoc around the world is so. And in that reality, we can face it, we can absorb it, we can let it be, and we can realize that we too are so. That we too are part of the response. We are part of the immune system. And a body has to know it's sick in order to mobilize an immune system. So we know that there is a sickness. We know that the ways of thinking and living and acting that have gotten humanity this far will lead to a suicide for our species if we do not make a change. But we also know that we have inherent within our very DNA itself the capacity to be that change. And I want to close with a quote from George Bernard Shaw. He said, "This is the true joy in life, to be used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. To be a force of nature, instead of a feverish clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy." He said, "I am a member of the community. As a member, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can before I die. Life is no brief candle to me. It is more of a splendid torch, which I want to burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations." So I want to thank you for burning your candle or your torch as brightly as you can, for every step you take to be a part of the solution, because together, one bite at a time, one step at a time, one meal at a time, one life at a time, we're changing this world. Thank you.